Richard. So preparing for the unexpected by thinking the unthinkable. Who could have even thought of that? So yes, red team thinking. It's not something that's a made up tool by a consultancy. This is a capability that's been around since the days of Socrates. So 2,500 years of evolution of this capability through the Prussians fighting Napoleon, through the Israelis during the Yom Kippur War, and then post 9/11, the CIA stood up the Red Cell and the US Army stood up the Red Teaming University. And it's continued to flourish in militaries, government agencies, and intelligence agencies across the world since then. And we've taken it and ported it into business after Bryce Hoffman, the author of Red Teaming, went through the US Army's schoolhouse back in 2015, because we saw the power of this capability of helping people think differently. So if I asked everybody, are we all rational and critical thinkers, as Adam Smith, Scottish philosopher, had us believe for over 300 years, we'd all say, yes, we are. It's our default lazy brain convincing us of that. But Daniel Kahneman, that great psychologist and philosopher, came along and proved it was absolute nonsense. And he said, our brain is this machine for jumping to conclusions. It sends us off down false avenues, convincing us that things are as they are, but really it's not, because our brain is clever and it's very lazy and it wants to go for the quickest solution. It wants to satisfy, as we call that. And that's fine when you're, as we talked about earlier, avoiding the saber-toothed tiger on the plains and that high-speed car that comes around the corner. The system one thinking kicks in and we react. But in a complex world, we can't react. We have to take a moment, we have to think, we have to respond and engage what's called system two thinking, which is far less error prone. Because today we live in, as we're all aware, this what's called a complex adaptive system. And within that, the system is made up of so many parts that we can't predict the behaviors, because everything is moving at different paces, different speeds, and reacting and responding to different things within the environment. And this is what's also known as a VUCA world, VUCA. And that, again, came from the military. It was from the US Army War College in the 80s. And it talked about volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And this was a state of the nation for the military's perspective post the Cold War. Add to that today H for hyperconnectivity, because everything we're now doing and seeing is hyperconnected across the world. Events that are happening are immediately transported through the internet, through communications, through the media, and therefore decisions we make are instant released, and therefore we can't retract them as we could do before. And then if you recall back to 2002, Donald Rumsfeld talked about unknown unknowns in his famous speech. And at the time, he was ridiculed by the media for this nonsense speech that he gave. Very confusing. But also another great Nobel Prize winner, Thomas Schelling, he said, one thing a person cannot do, no matter how rigorous their analysis or heroic their imagination, is to draw up a list of things that would never occur to them. Right? So it doesn't matter how smart, clever, intelligent, good looking you are, there are certain things that will just never occur to you. But somebody knows. And there's an old great Chinese proverb that says, none of us is as smart as all of us, which is why today we need to source the wisdom of the crowd, look to our people. And it's really interesting, therefore, when you look at the problems today, just going on the survey that came through, that survey showed us that we're focusing on money, business, and people. That needs to invert. If we focus on people first, that supports the business, and then the money comes as an outcome and an afterthought. If we focus on the money, we lose that impact of what our people can bring. And the reason why this is most executives today don't want to think the unthinkable. They find it too uncomfortable. They'd rather hide behind what we call comforting lies and not face into those uncomfortable, ugly truths that we all know about. And that's why so many businesses that we see die from self-inflicted wounds. And it's because of this irrational thought that we have. It's because of the cognitive biases that affect so many of the decisions made today. We have normalcy bias, where we can't really accept that things are going to get as bad as they do. Status quo bias, we want to keep things as they are. Ostrich effect, we put our head in the sand and don't really want to focus on the problems. Longevity bias, that's a great one. We've always done it this way. We want to keep it doing it that way. It's comfortable. And then also optimism bias. Often people are overly optimistic with their plans and their strategies, and they don't see these external threats. So as I said, the solution really is to look to your people. We have to create diverse teams, and we hear sort of DE&I programs, diversity, equality, and inclusion. Those have to stop being tick box quota-driven agendas. They have to be for real. And we had a great client last week. He said, if you have diversity without inclusion, you have delusion. So it's really about engaging those people, enabling them and empowering them to ask those uncomfortable questions. And once they get that support and recognition from the executive that that's what their task is, then you start to unleash greatness. And that's where we have with Red Team Thinking what we call a cognitive capability and a toolkit. It's not just a set of tools you can use. You have to understand the mindset, which is really important. And if you have that, that allows you to challenge the status quo. It allows you to ask better questions. It allows us to challenge our assumptions, ask what if, topple those dominoes about a major event in the future that could have a massive impact, and see what the first, second, third, fourth order impacts are. It allows us to ask about failure, talk about failure comfortably. This has been a disaster. We're on the headline news tomorrow. How did that occur? Work backwards. And we worked with Dr. Gary Klein, who came up with the pre-mortem, that great tool that's been around now for 30 years. Instead of doing a post-mortem, which we know is very uncomfortable, do a pre-mortem, contemplate failure before it happens. And I worked with him a couple of years ago, and we came up with what's called the triple filter method. Ask about 1, the impact of an event, 2, the likelihood of it happening, and then 3, do you have an ability to do something about it? And understand that, and then allows you to prioritize those risks and put them in order of how you address them. And then looking at the tools to do that, unleash the cognitive capability of your people, engage critical thinking, enable distributed decision-making, and encourage that diversity of thought. And if you do that, that's how you can plan for the unexpected, and that's how we can think the unthinkable.